Welcome to the Inspiring Spirit Show with Mandy Brown. Fellow authors and aspiring writers, what a guest we have for you today. Carolyn V. Hamilton is here. She was a commercial artist. She owned an ad agency, won several awards for graphic design, advertising, and community service. But she is also a multi-genre author with books published in mystery, romance, memoir, and non-fiction writing, as well as a few adult colouring books. Carolyn is listed in the Distinguished Women in Southern Nevada. For 11 years, she ran the online adventures travel magazine for women over 50 doing fun things. Currently, she's managing editor at the Swift House Press and success coach for memoir writers at Memoir to Legacy. And wow, what a full life she has had. And we mustn't forget that she also spent a few years in the Peace Corps and was once a Playboy bunny. So Caroline Hamilton, you're joining us today on the Inspiring Spirit Show from Ecuador. Welcome.
Thank you, Mandy. I was really kind of speechless listening to that introduction because I don't spend much time thinking about all of the adventures I've had in my life.
I know. It was lovely doing the research on you. I was thinking, and wow, you've done an impressive, I think I lost count, about 16 or 17 books are in your name, as well as hundreds of travel articles and writing blog posts. So I suppose the question is, when did you first start writing and how did it evolve to be multi-genre?
That's an interesting question. When I was in advertising, I started freelancing for some clients, creating brochures, and I realized that the brochures needed copy, and I didn't know any copywriters at the time. So I thought, well, I got A's in English in high school. I can do this. And so I started copywriting. And from there, with the ad agency, I learned how to write radio and television commercials and be concise in 30 or 60 seconds. And then I learned how to write news releases and do things for public relations and write stories about people. I enjoyed it. And it just felt like it worked well with the graphic design for me, and it served me well. So back to your question of how did I really start writing books? I had this idea for my first memoir, and I had notes in a drawer, and years had gone by, and I worked on it periodically and then got sidetracked again by life. And I was sitting and laying in hammocks actually a lot in the Peace Corps. I hate to say that, but it was true.
Sounds good.
and reading every paperback novel I could get my hands on. And I said to myself, I could do this. I could write a story. I could write a book. And I became really fascinated by the story of Elizabeth Sampson, the first Black woman in the history of Suriname to get legal permission to marry white. And her story was so amazing that I felt I really had to write it. And that's what I was going to do. And then I decided, well, I should write a romance because that'd be the easiest genre to write.
Of course.
But actually, romance, I think, is the hardest genre because romance authors are very picky about what they want in a story. And it's not as easy as it sounds. So, but I did write one romance, but Elizabeth Sampson, Forbidden Bride, was the first novel that I had published with a small publisher, which is a whole nother story. But that's how I got started. And then I just couldn't stop.
How old were you when you started writing your romance book?
In my 50s, late 50s.
Wow. Oh, you've done such a lot since then.
Yeah. Oh, wow. So, and I moved to Ecuador so that I wouldn't have to work, so to speak. I moved here about 9 years ago, and I was in the US and I had been experiencing age discrimination in the workforce, and I decided it's time to leave. I can't do this anymore. I need to go somewhere where I can live on my Social Security and just do what I want to do.
Yeah.
So that's how I came here.
God. Now I can see in some ways I see your books follow your extraordinary life, like, you know, the Coming to Vegas, a true tale of sex, drugs and Sin City in the 70s. And then there was also Help, I'm Married to an Alien, a comedian. So can you tell us more about why you wrote those two memoirs and any challenges that you faced while doing so?
Well, the first memoir about coming to Las Vegas in the 70s was just me wanting to tell a bunch of funny stories. And because it was such a weird experience, and there was so much humor in it and so much outrageousness. And we have kind of a saying in Las Vegas, only in Las Vegas. And, you know, when something weird happens, we just shake our heads and say, only in Las Vegas.
Yep.
And so I wanted to tell these funny stories. And of course, as the years progressed, people died. So I didn't have to worry about being sued for a lot of things. And it was 38 years. 38 years I had these notes in a drawer. And I'd interviewed friends I'd worked with at the hotel, and everybody was fine with me writing this book. And my very best friend, at the very end, she said, well, first she said, use my name, I don't care. And so then towards the end, when it was finally going to be published, she said, you know, I've got grandchildren now, and maybe you should change my name. So I said, okay, fine. What name do you want to use? And she said, Ronnie. And I said, okay. So she became Ronnie in the book, no problem. And then the book came out, and of course, her whole family read it and recognized her immediately. And then she said to me later, you know, that was so silly because everybody knows you and they all know your life, and they know, you know, this is like a family I grew up with, and her parents and everything. She says, well, they all know who everybody was in the book anyway, but nobody was offended. The funny part about it was I did get a phone call from a guy. And he, I didn't know, and he said, you know, you talked about my mother in your book, and I just wanted you to know that she and my father had this great relationship, and he was so good to her. And you know, and you didn't really mention that. And I emailed back and I said, this book wasn't about your mother. This book was about me.
Yes.
And secondly, I only knew your mother from working with her in the hotel, and she never mentioned you. I didn't even know you existed. You just weren't something she talked about. We had a nice conversation, and he was okay with that. But it was really funny. And I think the point of what I'm saying is the people you think will be most offended about you writing your memoir could care less. And the ones that you don't even give a second thought to come out of the woodwork. In my second book, when I wrote Help, I Married an Alien Comedian, which is like years later, and chronicles my relationship with my third and now ex-husband, the comedian. Just as I was getting ready to publish the book, I got an email from an old friend. I think she's maybe gone a little over the edge in recent years. I'm not sure what's going on with her, but out of the blue, she emailed me and said, please don't mention my name in your new memoir. And she wasn't even in my new memoir, except as an aside. So I just emailed back one word and said, done.
Excellent. Excellent. I like it. Short and to the point.
I have no idea where she's coming from or what she thought I was going to write about her, because there isn't anything sensational. So this is like a crapshoot in Vegas. You just put your story out there and see where the chips fall. Excellent. There are no guarantees.
So were there any other sort of, maybe not challenges, but something that you learned yourself as you went through the writing process of those memoirs? Did you come to any aha moments yourself, like find clarity in certain things that maybe have happened to you?
I can't say that there were any aha moments. I really enjoyed the entire process. I think I just love storytelling. And that's one reason why I just discovered this great software program online called Otto.ai. It's OTTO, like the name. .ai. And it's a voice to text program, and they give you 10 hours a month for free, and then you can buy more. But I and I'm working with a memoir client right now who is so terrified of the writing process. And so I have him, we work about an hour every couple of weeks, and he tells me his story, and we record it on auto, and then I just have to edit it. It's really easy.
That's interesting.
And it takes the fear away from the writing. There's this fear that people have about tapping the keyboard, I guess, or writing on the pad. The words aren't going to come. What if maybe it's a holdover from high school English where you had to write all those compositions for grades. But to tell your story, and that, first of all, the easy part of it is that it's your own voice. Your personality comes out in the words you say and the phrases you use and the way you tell your story. So your voice is just naturally there. So that's one thing you don't have to worry about. How do I show my voice? And then all you have to do is edit. I think it's a great writing process, and it goes much faster.
Yeah, excellent. I'll give that one a go for sure. So you've obviously also written fiction books that I spoke about. So where did you get your story ideas from them? And I'm sort of also looking for how we can help other writers out there who would like to write an adventure story or a mystery. Where did you find your ideas?
Ideas are everywhere. They're all around you if you just know to look for them. When I was writing my fiction book, Magicide, about magicians in Las Vegas, where a world famous magician is killed on national television in a roller coaster escape stunt, and all the suspects are magicians. So the way that came about was, we have a lot of magician friends in Las Vegas, and show business people tend to like to sit around and swap stories, and a lot of them are hilarious. And so I would listen to these guys tell their stories, and I'd be thinking, I could use that in a book. Yes. I can work with that. I can steal that.
So it's about asking people to tell you their stories to a certain extent, isn't it? And listening.
Yeah. So when I started writing, because the first part of the book is the roller coaster escape stunt, which the first time I saw the video, Lance Burton, who appeared at the Monte Carlo for years in Vegas, he would open his show with this video of the roller coaster escape stunt. And you'd sit there in the audience and your hands would sweat just watching this video. And his mentor was Johnny Thompson, who was has passed now, but was the magician's magician. He did magic himself, but he also was a mentor and coach to other famous magicians. And he worked for years with Penn and Teller and was a consultant on their show, Fool Us. And I went to him, and he read what I wrote, and I said, I want to write this without totally, am I okay? I'm giving away how the stunt works. Are you okay with that? Is everybody going to be okay with that? And he corrected a few things to say, well, this works this way, and that's called that. And really helped me a lot. So nobody objected to me writing this story. A funny part about it was I was sitting around one day, and I was first going to call it Murder by Magic, but I Googled that and it had already been taken. And this is another point I want to make. When you're going to write your story and you come up with your potential title, Google it, see if anybody else is using it. Now, it doesn't mean you can't use it, because you can't copyright a title, but why would you want to? You want to have your own book and your own words. So don't use somebody else's title. You're a writer, you're creative, you don't have to. You can do better than that. So anyway, I'm sitting around in the dining room with my then husband and a magician friend of ours, and we're kicking around, Jack Hayden, we're kicking around ideas for this title, because I don't want to call it now Murder by Magic. And so so Jack says, well, how about abracadabra? And I'm going, okay, I'll write that down, maybe with that. And so Cork is sitting at the other end of the table, and in a pause in the conversation, he says, how about poof, you're fucked? I hope you can say that on the radio. It was funny.
Well, you can edit it out if you can't. It's fine.
Okay. So that's how I came up with that. Now, the way I came up with my romance is in Suriname, we met this British eco-activist traveling around South America on a trimaran, and he was so colorful and so interesting. And then we had been in the Amazon in Peru previously to joining the Peace Corps. So Cork had said, oh, let's go to the Amazon before they burn it all down. And I said, okay. Little did we know that a year later we'd be living in the northeast corner of the Amazon basin. But anyway, so here we are in Peru at this eco lodge, Explorama, and I meet this interesting girl from George Washington University, and she's building a library for the Yanomamo Indians. And so later, I always remember meeting her and hearing her stories and everything. And I thought, well, I could write this steamy jungle romance, and she could be my protagonist, and Clive Kelly could be my hero. And so that's how I got my characters for Hard Amazon Rain. And the conflict there is that she believes that the Indians, the only way they can save their ancestral lands and deal with the 21st century is through books and education. And he believes that the indigenous tribes should totally be left alone, not contacted at all, and just ignored by modern society, which of course isn't very realistic, but that was their conflict.
Yeah, brilliant.
So that was Hard Amazon Rain, and then I talked about Magicide.
Yes, you did.
And Implosion. I can't remember where I got that idea. $6 million hidden in a hotel destined for destruction, and I think that probably that came about because there was a period of time where hotels were being imploded in Las Vegas right and left.
Ah, yes.
Yeah. And of course, all the characters in that book. I mean, I know those people. I know showgirls, and I know, drug dealers, and I know Elvis impersonators and casino owners. And so it was very easy to come up with characters.
Yeah, brilliant. And I think I read somewhere you said that you meet, like you've just said, some very interesting people, and you might take 2 or 3 of them and put them in a bottle, shake them up, and then go, what if? And you take that. Sometimes helps you come up with things as well. I thought it was really good little tip you gave.
Yeah, I was working with a memoir. I was working with a memoir writer in Hawaii who had been from London, and he was writing his memoir, which was one thing. And then in the course of our coaching, he talked about his grandmother who had come as a young girl from the Caribbean to London. And I said, her story would make a great novel.
Yeah.
So you could just write her, when you get finished with your memoir, consider writing her story as a novel.
Yes. Oh, excellent. Now, I know you've had the Memoir to Legacy program for aspiring memoir writers, and you sort of very kindly told me that you're actually working on an online course at the moment.
Yes, I want to create a 4-week course, basically, that people can go through and address all of the things. I have a book called The 5 Important Parts of a Successful Memoir and Why You Need Them. And I want to explore more these parts, which include dialogue and character development and all the things that you'd have to think about if you were writing a novel. And I want to put that into an online course, and I've done some videos, and I've got the outline, and I've been interrupted by life.
Yeah.
So I'm not even going to tell you how long I've been working on this, but because I'm embarrassed. And I mean, 38 years to write my first memoir. I can admit to that, but this course I'm not going to admit to. And this year I'm committed to getting it done.
Excellent. Well, I'll let you into a secret. It took me 30 years to write my first memoir too. And I'd had notes sitting in the drawer for 30 years.
Well, there you go.
There you go. So I know you've got a Facebook group for writers. Who, what was that aimed at for, and how are you finding that's developing?
I started this group, I'm thinking 4 or 5 years ago. It's called Aspiring Memoir Writers. And I read somewhere that if you wanted to build a following and all of that kind of stuff, start a group. And so I looked around and there wasn't hardly anything for memoir writers on Facebook. So I started this group, and I'm just amazed at how it's grown. And there are about 1,400 members now. And I'm getting 3 to 10 new requests every day. It's a private group, and I turn down people where there are pages with moderators, because I don't know who else is going to be able to access it. And I'm doing this not to be paranoid, but because I want the group members to feel that there are real people in this group, individuals who are somewhere in the memoir writing or publishing process, and not businesses or other groups, or I don't know how else to explain that, but anyway, that's what I do. And then sometimes I turn down people. There's 3 questions they have to answer to join, and occasionally I'll turn down somebody if they don't answer the questions and there's no information about them on the applying form, and they belong to 1,500 other groups.
Yes, I understand.
So I do try to have some criteria, because I want to keep the group engaged and helpful. So I had several of them ask if we could do an online writers group. So now we just had our second one last week, and I've started an online writing, I don't like the word critique, but feedback group. They read and get some feedback, and I call that Write On Memoir Writers Group, writing group. And we do that on Zoom, and boy, they love it.
Excellent.
And they're finding it very helpful. So I moderate that.
Oh, brilliant. Now, I know many people want to write a memoir about a certain period in their lives, and sometimes it's for the family, or it's for a community, or it's to inspire, maybe even expose something, or certainly to get a conversation going to increase understanding. And of course, sometimes just to entertain. But on paper, it becomes I'm trying to be kind here, a boring chronological set of notes. Okay, so, how can you help such writers turn their offering into the next bestseller instead? No pressure, like.
I understand that it can feel like that. And I have a lot of people ask me, well, who's going to be interested in my story? And you don't know until you put it out there. If you put it out there and only one person reads your book and has an aha moment for something in their own life, then it's all been worth it, in my opinion. To take it, and this kind of goes back to the storytelling part that I was referring to earlier with the voice to text program. You think in terms, and maybe a good idea is to sit down with a friend, maybe an old friend who knows you really well, and talk about your story, or maybe somebody you've just met that you feel a connection to. And the kinds of things that happen when we tell a story over lunch with a couple of glasses of wine, for instance, is is, well, where did he come from? The other person starts to ask questions. Yeah. Well, why did you think that? Where did you get that idea? Why did that person do that? Well, where did he come from? Well, what did he look like? Was he cute? So these are all questions that readers want to know as well.
Of course, yeah, of course.
And so if you think of it in terms of, I'm telling a story, and then of course the next thing is, and then what happens? I did improv comedy for a while in Seattle to kind of keep my creativity going. It was great fun. Yeah. And they had an exercise. It was a 7 points, I think, story, and you would do it was an improv comedy routine. Mm-hmm. And so the first part of it was, once upon a time, there was. And so then the first person would say, well, there's this person who lived in some story and they did this, mm-hmm. and they lived in some country. And then the second one was, and one day something happened. Well, in fiction, that's your inciting incident. This is part of the hero's journey that writers talk about. Yeah. So then something happened. And because of that, something happened. And because of that, something happened. Yeah. And because of that, something happened, until one day, this thing happened. And ever since that time, blah, blah, blah. That's the outline. And that's the outline of your memoir.
Mm. Yes.
You were this person doing this thing, and suddenly you realized, or suddenly you traveled to, or suddenly you were in an accident, or suddenly a mysterious disease was diagnosed, or or suddenly you realized you had to leave this husband. And I mean, it's the same story format or formula, if you want to call it.
Yes. Yeah, I remember doing something very similar with my children when they were little, and they'd be sitting around, and we'd just say, one day there was a mushroom, and the next person would have to continue the sentence. So
yes, that's exactly the improv formula. That's exactly what they do in improv, because and the more outrageous you can be, the funnier it is.
It is, absolutely, yeah. And
I think that would be a great game to play with children.
Yeah, they loved it.
Maybe there's a children's book. There's a how-to children's book somewhere.
Oh, could be. Excellent. So I know you've actually also written books to help writers. So I think you've already mentioned one, the 5 important parts of a successful memoir and why you need them. But you've written a couple of others as well, haven't you? Like power editing for memoir writers.
Yes, actually the first help book I wrote, or nonfiction, was power editing for fiction writers.
How was it? Okay.
And then when I started working more and more with memoir writers, because the book is divided up into 2 sections, and the first section is about the content and flow of your story, and then the second section is about the actual writing process and how to tweak cliches and how to tighten up your writing and things like that. I realized that I could do this specifically for memoir writers. The second part of the book would be the same, because basically it's grammar, punctuation, and word use. And the first part of the book I would readapt and solely for memoir writers, because the storytelling is a little bit different. So that's when I wrote Power Editing for Memoir Writers.
And then I've seen you've got which I don't know whether this one came next, I'm not sure, but you've got the big red power pen editing system. And I think I need that one. Which is, get rid of all the amount of times when I look over manuscripts I've written, I'm going, why have I put the word very in there again? What? Take that out, because I use it in my speech. So things like that. So
I'm working with a client right now, and he has what I call the and the okay.
Yes, I think I'm with him. Yes.
Habits. And when he writes dialogue, he tends to start every sentence in dialogue with, well, yes, I guess so. Or, well, yes, okay. Or, okay, we'll do this. Okay. He starts so many sentences with well and okay.
Yeah.
And when I remove all the wells and most of the okays, it really flows a lot better, because they become so distracting.
Yeah, that's a really, really good book to get your hands on, because you don't know you're doing it, because it's usually part of your natural speech.
The wonderful fun thing about Word, I mean, I work in Microsoft Word and Scrivener, but I love Word because of the edit find function. I think this is the eighth wonder of the world.
It is, I'm with you.
You can go through your entire book and you can check for misspellings of your character's name, or I've caught that in some of my stuff, and see how many times you used and, how many times you used well, how many times you said okay, how many times you said very. Means nothing. What's the difference between a dark night and a very dark night?
Yeah, exactly. And the word really as well, that's another one, isn't it?
Yes, yes.
Really. Well, what's that word doing there? And then you've got, I think, throw up, which I must admit I downloaded yesterday. Throw up your emotions on paper, a workbook planner of 21 challenges to help you learn to write about emotions in your memoir in 21 days. So that's on my bedtime reading list tonight.
That came about from a challenge. I was in a group with a bunch of other coaches, and they were doing these challenges. And I thought, well, this will be fun. So I created this 21-day challenge, and I put it out to the members of the Facebook group. And I think I charged $35 for it or something. And the next thing I knew, I had about 20 people. And so for 21 days, we did these challenges, and I read their responses, and it was really time consuming, but it was so interesting and so much fun. And out of that, I thought, well, this needs to be a workbook, because I can't do this again online live, because it was way too much work. But out of it came this workbook, and people seem to really get a lot out of it, because it is difficult, especially to write about painful feelings. I think everybody struggles with that.
That's right. And I mean, I've seen some brilliant things that you put on your Facebook. I happen to be a member of the Facebook group you're talking about, Aspiring Memoirs, and I think I commented the other day that you'd put, again, yet some really valuable stuff there. So, I would say to anybody, authors out there or aspiring authors, go on this Facebook site, because there's so much there that you're very generous with the information that you give. It's, really appreciated.
Well, thank you. And it's such a prominent part of my life that I'll be noodling around the internet, or I'll be out somewhere, and I think, oh God, this would be so great for my memoir writers. I've got to share this. Like the other night when we watched Hillbilly Elegy, and it was really interesting to see people's comments when I posted that I had read the book and just seen the movie. And then people started to comment about about the Meryl Streep character and what they thought. It was really, really interesting conversation.
Excellent.
Now, and I think that's really important to read other memoirs, because you need to know what other people are saying, how they're writing about it. And so the first thing I advise is go find other books out there on Amazon that written by people dealing with what you want to write about. And that shouldn't discourage you. That tells you there's a market for that kind of story. I had another client who, I'm sorry to say, for some unknown reason, has never published his book. And I cannot figure out for the life of me what's going on in his head, because it was finished, it was ready to go. And then I guess he got cold feet. And I don't think it has to do with anything about what somebody else is going to think about the book. I think it's a perfection issue. But anyway, it's about his son who killed himself, and he was schizophrenic. And this is a story that anybody who's suddenly had a family member or been diagnosed with schizophrenia, and they're looking for information on that. They're looking for other people's experiences. And his experience could be so helpful to so many people. And I guess he just doesn't see it.
No, I mean, I know when I wrote my first memoir, I did cry through things which I thought I'd got over a long, long time. As I was writing, it was making me cry. And I'm thinking, oh, I'm just going to put this down. And I've got another memoir that I need to write regarding our son, who's deafblind, autistic, and was abused, not by us, obviously, but by, well, I'll explain that another time. But yeah, and I know it would be painful for me to write, but I am going to write it. And I think, you know, you're absolutely right. This young man that you're talking about, whose son was killed, there are other people, very sadly, that would benefit from feeling, I know what that feels like. Let's encourage him to get the book published. That would be really good.
Well, here's the other thing. In fact, I think I might call him and give him the what for.
Yes, you do that.
Because this is a perfect time for his book to come out, because there's in the U.S. news, there's a lot of news now about mentally ill homeless people and mentally ill people with guns who are in situations, and people who are confronted by the police in a violent manner when what they really need is mental health help. And that's, I mean, his story of how they went to their church and for help, and they went to, you know, just all these different places they went to that didn't work. And that could be really helpful to someone else.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think with us, and it was in one way the care system let him down, because it was a young adult that wanted to live on his own, despite the disabilities. And in that situation, he was taken advantage of and abused, and he ended up being sectioned for 3 years in hospital. And then they found out that he didn't need to be, because he didn't have what they thought he had. He was just autistic. It was a nightmare, an absolute nightmare. But I know that we were very strong through. But other people who have similar things, maybe it could be a lifeline. And I think that's what a lot of memoir writers who've been through traumatic things.
Well, that's what it is. And imagine if we didn't have diaries and journals and plantation notes and ship manifest logs from previous centuries. We wouldn't have a clue how people lived.
That's true. Yeah. So on another note, you were married to Court Proctor, you know, the Las Vegas comedy legend, of course. So some people worry or shy about writing or including comedy in their writing. Can you give any tips on how to include comedy in our writing?
Wow, that's a tough question.
Sorry.
That's a tough question to answer. But I think and I'm not a mental health specialist, and I'm not a lawyer, and I want to make sure everybody knows I'm not any of those things, but that doesn't keep me from having opinions. And sometimes you look at a tragedy and you have to see what's funny about it. This is where a lot of comedy comes from. And so we accept a lot of really outrageous thoughts and phrases and sentences because it's done in the name of comedy. And I think if there's some way you can learn how to look at the funny side of something, or the ironic side of something, then you can do that. When I first got the idea to write this book about my relationship with Cork, I was going through the divorce, and I was angry, and I was hurt, and I was bitter. And I thought, I'm going to write this book. And I was reading everything I could get my hands on about verbal and emotional abuse, because there's a very fine line between comedy and cruelty.
Yes.
And I could talk for another hour on that subject. But I thought, no, I don't want this book to be angry and bitter. And I want this book to be honest and forthright, because the reality is, if there weren't some really good times, why did I stay for so many years? And that's a legitimate question. Why do we stay in a relationship that isn't what we think it should be?
Yes.
And so it was a challenge for me. It was really hard to write the story. So first of all, I just started with all the incidents and all the events. And then I looked at those and I said, okay, if I include all of this, is the book going to sound bitter and angry? Or could I just, because it wasn't all bitter and angry. And so could I just put these few places in there so people get the idea that it wasn't easy to live with this comedian who opens his mouth before he thinks, and write something that's interesting. So it took some time for me to write that book. I had to get over a lot of things, get past them, and see them and see the humor in them, and see how my reactions to them contributed to my unhappiness.
Yeah, I mean, when we watch comedians, a lot of the comedy is visually, almost from behavior, the pauses, the timing, they say, and things like that, and trying to translate that to writing can be quite hard, can't it? I know I've used puns quite a lot, because and what I call dark humor in our memoir. And I know when I was writing it, because it was the subject at the time was somebody dying with cancer, and it seems for some people really the wrong thing to do, but in the end I just went with my heart and just thought, that's what we did, that's how we dealt with it, so it's going in the book. But I understand it can be very difficult because everybody comes from different perspectives, don't they?
Cork and I are right now working on a new book that we just came up with over breakfast a couple of days ago.
Excellent.
And we're going to tell all of his jokes, all of his stories, and just publish that in a book, because he doesn't have an act, but he has a lot of one-liners and a lot of funny stories. Excellent. And so that's what this book is going to be about. And he tells a story about his friend who was one of the 4 freshmen, and so he's dying, and he also was a trombone player, and he's dying, and he's in the hospice, and he's and so they're this little group of friends, trombone players and entertainers, and they all come to visit him one last time, that kind of thing. It's very heavy. And they go in, and somebody Cork, I think, brought a bottle of Chivas Regal and some little paper cups, and so they all, he passes out these little paper cups and fills them with scotch and says, give one to Bob. And Bob Flanagan was his name. And somebody said, well, he's on medication, he can't have alcohol. And Cork said, he's dying, give him anything he wants. Yes. And so the ludicrous part of it was, and he said that really lightened up the whole moment, because it was uncomfortable for everybody. We know he's dying, nobody wants to talk about it. And so Cork just put it out there and said, hey, give him the scotch. If he wants the scotch, have a scotch. And Bob's going, yeah, I want the scotch.
Excellent. Oh my God. So I'd love to talk to you for hours and hours, but just before we move on to you giving us a reading, I just want to say, when you're not writing, how do you spend your time?
When I'm not writing?
Yeah, when you're not writing.
Actually, I probably don't spend that much time every day writing. I probably spend maybe an hour, 2 hours a day writing. Wow. And the rest of the time I spend with my memoir writers in some capacity. I study online book marketing, and because that's a constantly changing thing with the technology. Like I said, I've been writing for 20 years, and I've just discovered this otter AI. So
Yes.
there's always something new out there. And I'm interested in finding out about those things. So I study marketing a lot, book marketing and online course marketing. And then we go out to lunch
Yeah.
to our favorite terrace restaurant where it's all open air.
Oh, lovely.
And I do some watercolor painting.
Nice.
And I have a piano keyboard that I haven't touched in 5 years, but I'm thinking about it.
Oh, go for it. Go for it.
And so, I mean, that's about it. I cook. Yeah, I cook probably 2 meals a day at least. And just, I go on Facebook and hang out with my friends. And that's about it. Before the pandemic, I was teaching classes. I had turned an extra bedroom into a little classroom for 6 people, and I was teaching classes in the house, and I was teaching watercolor classes and writing classes. And then of course I had the magazine. And the pandemic really caused me to sit down and think about what's important to me. What do I really want to spend my time on? I'm, shall we say, a woman of a certain age, and you start to think about these things anyway. So towards that end, I passed the magazine on to a wonderful younger woman who lives in Spain, American living in Spain, and she's doing the magazine now. So that's off my plate. And I stopped doing classes in my house, obviously, because as soon as this pandemic came out, first of March, we had a mask mandate here and a social distancing mandate and a curfew.
Yeah.
So Ecuador went straight into lockdown. And we still have the mask mandate and the social distancing mandate. And every time you go to a store, supermarket, or the mall, you get your temperature taken and your hands sprayed with alcohol. So, and nobody objects. Nobody thinks anything of it. As one of my friends said, well, we Ecuadorians know how to follow directions. We're not like you uppity, independent Americans. We know how to follow directions.
Oops. Great. Well, it keeps everyone safe, I suppose. So that's good.
Anyway, yeah. So we're pretty safe here, and I find that now that I'm staying home more, I do get more writing and painting done, and I save a lot of money.
Yeah. Excellent. So, would you mind giving us a little taster? Read a short extract from your first memoir.
Okay.
Vegas.
I'd love to. I was looking for this piece, trying to figure out what to write the other day, and the next thing I knew, a couple of hours had gone by while I was reading my own book.
Oh, well, that's always good. Always a good sign.
But I want to read an early part of coming to Las Vegas, and this is obviously in the 70s, and Vegas was a much smaller town, and these are my initial impressions. I've come to town with my soon-to-be second husband, a soldier of fortune, and we've got a trailer. And in those days, they had trailer parks on the Strip. So this is from that period. This is a little piece from that. In April 1973, I stand on the sidewalk of the famous Las Vegas Strip and brace myself against the strong desert winds that blow tumbleweeds across the street. Good Lord, I think, what a windblown brown wasteland. If the desert winds of April didn't swirl sand everywhere, beautiful mountain views on all sides would be visible. Tumbleweeds compete with cars in a crazy dance on the wide strip. I hate these high winds because I wear hard contact lenses. To walk from the car to the trailer or from the office to the washing machine, I have to peek through the fingers of my cupped hands. A few years ago in the 60s, I spent 2 different weekends in Las Vegas partying, which may explain why I don't remember all this yucky wind and blowing sand. I can't believe how dry the air is. The balls of my feet harden so fast that the skin splits. For 2 days, the pain is like walking on paper cuts. When I brush my hair, it stands up and crackles with electricity. This is a climate for picking your nose. Things crust up in there so often that I'm afraid if I stay here, I'll develop the habit. I go through a lot of re-wetting drops for my contacts. How can anyone live here? I ask Dell. You'll get used to it. Besides, it's not like we're staying long. We'll be going on the road. Can't be soon enough for me. Still, I wonder, what is it that attracts people to move here, to have a house or apartment, a job, and go to work every day? This feels to me like a temporary town, not some place you'd ever call home. It looks like a pass-through for people born somewhere else, on their way to somewhere else, a bus stop in the desert. I have the impression that here the fast buck rules, and excitement comes from the feeling that you're on the last frontier. You feel like anything is possible here. The big score, the instant fame. Everyone's seen Ocean's 11 and heard of the infamous Rat Pack. Lots of entry-level jobs beckon, with the idea that once you get a foot in the door, big, breathtaking things will happen. Who thinks about what it'll be like here 20 years from now? No one I know considers buying an acre off the strip for $2,500 and sitting on it for 30 years to make $1 million. Everyone but me seems to love the weather. Joanne justifies the high temperatures with the phrase I'll hear again and again, but it's a dry heat. Still, when it's upwards of 100, people hide behind their air conditioners. I'm amazed that our little generator can cool the interior of the wilderness trailer. Dell enjoys hanging out in the Lone Palm office, drinking coffee and swapping stories with Bill, who spends his evenings listening to the police radio. I get the impression that Bill lives another life vicariously through Dell. These guys can talk for hours with nostalgia for the good old days when the mob ruled the town. Apparently it was great, unless you were black. Then you had to stay on the west side with your own kind, even if you were a star like Sammy Davis Jr. I think Bill and Joanne are about the same age as Dell, in their mid-40s. For 10 years, they've had the run of the Lone Palm Motel. Joanne wears her bleached white hair in a bubble a la 1959 and sleeps every day until noon. Bill, a man with dark bushy eyebrows, white sideburns, and a quiet voice, also runs an under-the-table business. He buys and sells televisions and guns and used appliances and this and that. Since they came to the Lone Palm from Oklahoma, Bill and Joanne have never taken a vacation. Do you think he's cooking the books? I asked Dell. I can imagine how, in Bill's management capacity, this would be easy to do. They take in so much cash. Why else would they never want to take a vacation? Dell tamps tobacco into his pipe bowl before he answers. I'm not saying it's true, but a vacation could mean a sudden increase in Lone Palm profits that the property owner would notice. The following Monday, Neil Griffin arrives and Dell introduces me. Neil, who was Dell's longtime ATF boss, lives at the Lone Palm during the week. On the weekends, he drives home to Orange County. In his off hours, Neil likes to hang out in the Lone Palm office too. I learned that Neil, Dell, and Bill love to drink coffee together, reminisce about the old days, and share off-color, racist, and gender-insensitive jokes. During our first week at the Lone Palm, I begin to meet some of the regulars. One afternoon, we're hanging around the office drinking coffee when in walks a hippie-looking guy about my age wearing a cowboy hat. Kind of a nice-looking guy, I think. This is John, Bill says. He lives here. Just dropped in to get my mail, John says. Got to head over to the west side before dark to find a guy. Bill hands him some envelopes. Nice to meet you, John says, tips a finger to his hat and leaves. What does he do? I ask Dell. Dell looks at Bill, who looks at Neil, and the three of them laugh. That's John the bounty hunter, Bill says. He makes money finding guys for a bail bondsman. Who knew there were real bounty hunters today? I remember bounty hunters as characters in old westerns. Neil watches John get into his car. We think on the side he also deals a little dope and pimps a little pussy. Bill follows his gaze and smiles. Live and let live. Next afternoon, I'm in the office talking to Joanne when a car pulls up in front. Bill, Joanne calls, Helen's here. Bill comes to the front of the desk carrying some little electronic gadget he's in the middle of repairing. I stand to one side to let a skinny, wrinkled woman who looks older than she probably is open the office door. A blast of hot air enters with her. She approaches the desk. She doesn't say anything as she gives Bill some crumpled bills. He hands her a key. She nods and leaves, banging the door behind her. No paperwork. We think she lives out of that old car, Joanne confides, or maybe she just uses it for storage. I peek out the window to look as the woman gets into her car. Junk is packed so high in the back seat and on the passenger side of the front seat that when she drives, she can't possibly see out of any of those windows. I'd be afraid to drive a car like that. Every time Helen leaves and comes back, her car looks exactly the same, as if none of the stuff has ever been moved. I'm amazed the police don't stop her while she's driving. A few hours later, Mac arrives. Bill introduces us and asks if we'd like to buy some jumbo prawns at a good price. Got good packets of big frozen ones, Mac says, just off the plane from Mexico. We all go outside to Mac's car. Mac opens the trunk. It's stuffed with cardboard boxes. 25 cents a pound, Mac says. Bill and Joanne buy 3 boxes and we buy 1. Over a delicious prawn dinner that evening in the tiny kitchen of our trailer, Del explains, there's a huge black market in Vegas for shrimp and lobsters from Mexico. They come in the same way the drugs come in, small planes flying so low over the Salton Sea that they're under the government's radar. Then they land somewhere close in the desert, and the goods are distributed around town through a pre-established network. I guess Bill is a part of the network. While the feds are quite interested in drugs, I get the impression they're not too concerned about illegal seafood. On weekends, the Lone Palm is always full. The weekenders spend most of their time at the pool yelling at their kids. The intense heat and desert winds don't seem to bother them at all. Because of the variety of people who pass through the Lone Palm, I begin to refer to the motel as the crossroads of the world. In a letter to my parents in Seattle, I write, there are not a lot of rules here. In addition to children and dogs and cats, it's not uncommon to see lions, chimpanzees, or even an elephant. This may not be a very intellectually stimulating place to live, but it certainly is colorful.
Brilliant. Oh, and excellently read too. Brilliant. Yeah, there was just so much there. You're so engaging. You engaged all the senses in the way that you write, and I could actually visualize the characters and the scenes. And I mean, I'm already warming to those colourful characters and I want to know what happens. So, yeah, and I can see that book, I'm going to have to read it now, is definitely going to be one full of fun, sins, of course, laughter, and certainly adventure. So thank you very much for reading that. Thank you.
Well, I'm happy to say it's getting really good reviews on Amazon. And yes. And the funny thing that really surprised me the most was that early on after it was published, it became #1 in Amazon's category for LGBTQ and gender studies.
Really?
I would never have thought that was an Amazon category, but it brings up a good point that before you write your memoir, you want to look and see what categories memoirs fall into. Because that's when you get to advertising later, that's good to know.
Yes, it is. But yeah,
well, technically, I'm a #1 Amazon bestseller for whatever that's worth.
That is excellent. Excellent. So how can our listeners contact you, buy your books, or find out more about the support they can get as memoir writers?
Well, I'd love it if anybody who's interested in writing a memoir or marketing a memoir would come over to Facebook and join our group, Aspiring Memoir Writers. Yeah. And then I have my website, carolynvhamilton.com. The publishing company is swifthousepress.com. And, I'm all over Facebook. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on Twitter.
Excellent. Yeah, and we'll put your photograph and your links as well on our Facebook.
Yeah, they can just, and if they want to find out about my books, the best thing to do is to go to Amazon and just under books, type, or Kindle store, type in carolynvhamilton.com, and then a page will come up with that shows everything I've written.
Excellent.
And they can click on whatever they're interested in.
Brilliant. So, Carolyn, my mission, that I feel my mission in life, is to touch the souls of others in a meaningful and inspirational way as possible so that they can manifest their dreams, whatever they may be.
Oh, wow. Can I steal that?
If you want. There you go, great, I've inspired you. But can you please share, because I know you've got loads, but can you please share some final words of wisdom or of encouragement for our community, or even just one of your favorite inspirational quotes, please?
I don't have a favorite. Well, I'll tell you one of my favorite inspirational quotes, sort of, is, oh shoot, now I can't, I'm having an artist moment. I don't have secret moments. I'm having an artist moment.
I like it, an artist moment, yes.
The Bird by Bird book, Anne Lamott. And she wrote, if people didn't want me to write about them in my memoir, they should have behaved better.
I like it.
Well, I think if I can say anything, I'd like to say something inspirational. And I hear people say to me, well, it's easy for you, but it's not easy for me. And I get that. I understand it. And it wasn't always easy for me. It's a process, and to get past fear.
Yes.
Get past fear, because 99% of the things, well, maybe it's only 94% of the things we worry about never happen.
True.
And if we could just get past, and maybe, I don't know, I just know so many people who are coming from a place of fear, not just writers, but I don't know, in today's political climate, I'm seeing that so much. And if we could just get past the fear of what people will think, which I understand is a tribal instinct, because we are all tribal creatures. And if we can't get along and don't work on it as a team, there's that old thing about being shunned and being an outsider. But I think we just have to do whatever it takes to get past that fear. Just take a deep breath and put it out there. And maybe you only put a little bit of it out there at a time. And so you kind of test the waters, and then nothing bad happens. And so you go a little further into the ocean, and nothing bad happens. And so you swim a little further. And I don't know. And I wish I had a really clever way to say all that.
Well, I know that it's actually in the front of one of my books, actually. It was something I used to say to my daughter, but I actually stole it from, remember the film, oh my God, what is it called now? Not Dirty Dancing, it's one of the other ones.
Saturday Night Live?
No, it'll come to me in a minute. You might know it when you know the quote, but in it she says, or he says, a life lived in fear is a life half lived.
Yeah.
A life lived in fear is a life half lived. And I can see her dancing it now, but I can't think what it's called. Strictly Ballroom. I think it was Strictly Ballroom.
Yeah, it's anyway. Years and years ago, I saw somebody on television touting their book, and I've forgotten the name of the book now, but they'd gone around and interviewed a lot of old people, and they'd asked them the question, if you had your life to do over again, what would you do differently? And almost all of them said, I would have taken more chances.
Ah, nice. Yes. Yeah. I agree. Yeah, I think that's a good one to follow. And that's good.
I would rather regret the things I did than the things I didn't do.
Yes, definitely.
Wow, I just thought of that. I better write it down.
Write that down quick.
I keep a piece of paper and a pencil right next to my laptop. How sick is that?
That's a really good tip. I've got pieces of paper and pens everywhere. But excellent. It's nice when we can bounce ideas off each other as well. That's great. So fortunately our time's come to end. So thank you, Caroline V. Hamilton, for joining us today. It has been truly entertaining, informative and inspirational to have you with us.
Oh,
it's been absolute pleasure to have them.
It's been my pleasure. I've really enjoyed chatting with you, and I hope people will come on over and join our writers group on Facebook.
Well, yeah, I mean, I can actually share a couple of reviews I found about that very thing of how it feels to work with you. There was one that said her professionalism, ideas and willingness to make that extra effort really made a difference. Without her encouragement and resources, I'd never have finished my book. And another one was, Carolyn helped me structure my story and focus my writing in an effective way that I would never have imagined. So yeah, get on over there.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, even your new book, the 5 important parts of the successful memoir. I saw one on there that actually said, this is a must read if you want to write a compelling memoir, and I agree totally with that.
I think that one is only 99 cents.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
And you take the mystery of how to turn your story into something readers want to read, and I think that's really important. So thank you for that. Yeah, glowing reviews, absolutely.
Thank you.
So I hope Caroline has motivated you today, given you something to think about and follow up with action. All of my guests on this show are automatically entered into the Inspiring Spirit Award 2021. So if you feel that Carolyn has been impactful and inspirational for you today, or you recognise how she makes a huge difference to yours or other people's lives, then please vote for her on the Silent Voices Radio Facebook page by commenting on and sharing her posts. This is Silent Voices International Radio Station, where everyone has a voice. You've been listening to Mandy Brown, author of her own memoirs, Nipples to Kneecaps, To Die or Not to Die with Cancer. And this is the Inspiring Spirit Show, a show to feed your soul with hope, strength, and love. Thank you for listening.